Hi, Michael. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Real pleasure. Michael, your story, I think, is quite a unique one. I've had the pleasure of interviewing lots of people from all sorts of backgrounds, do all sorts of things all over the country. And I think you might be the first doctor that we've had on the show. I might be wrong because we are nearly 400 episodes into this show, but I think your story is quite unique. And in addition to that, you've been incredibly generous with your time. You've done an incredible case study for us already at the roadmap and a wonderful masterclass. So I'm a big fan of your work and your teaching styles. And I've been really keen to get you on the show for a little while. Obviously, we're both very, very busy, but it's great to have you on. Michael, for our listeners, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, about your business, what you're doing and where you're doing it?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. What a kind intro. Yeah, so my name is Michael. We live in Hampshire. I'm married with three wonderfully terrible teenagers, one of whom is for sale. If anyone's interested, let me know. That might be a good investment or not. Or I could pay you, actually. Maybe that might work. I don't know if that. But we're down in Hampshire. So basically my story is I am a doctor. I've been a doctor for sort of 20 odd years, been a GP for 15 of those years. And I guess sort of 2019, I was just thinking, right, is this staring at the same four walls thinking, is this it? Is this, I've got 25 years left until I can retire. And is this what I want to be doing for the next 25 years? And I think, the answer was a pretty resounding no. And so it was then a case of, right, what do I need to do differently? Life is short. We only each get one of them. And I guess property then kind of came from that. It was looking at the options, thinking, what do I want to be doing? And I think property, just the beauty of property, the capital growth that we get whilst having monthly income, I think there's nothing really, no investment vehicle that does that. And for us, it was a bit of a no-brainer. And off we went and changed our lives. And here we are.
Okay, I mean, a couple of questions on that. I find this such a fascinating topic. And I resonate really strongly with your story. I wasn't a doctor, but I was a physio. A lot of our listeners will know that. And I remember the moment that I sort of said to myself, well, I can't do this anymore. I honestly can't be in this room. And by the way, every GP has got that office that none of the GPs actually want to use. And everything gets chucked in there. And it's not got any windows. And that was my office. I ran the clinics for the local GPs and they're a great team, great people to work with. But I was always in the worst room. And my room didn't even have windows. So I was just staring at these four walls with that lighting that they seem to only have in the NHS. And I was like, I really don't think I can do this for the next 40 years. So I totally get it. But I also remember how difficult that decision was for me. And I did that when I was relatively untethered. I didn't have any children. I had some mortgages by that point, but I was very transient. I could pretty much do anything at that point in my life. And you had already set up your life. You had a family and things like that. Can you take us back to that time? What decisions did you have to weigh up as a doctor and as a family to take that? Because I know a lot of our members in the community feel the same. Not everybody, but I know a lot of people do want to make a change. And I know how difficult that is. And I think listening to perhaps how you got there to that conclusion might maybe either inspire some people or just give them that kind of little sort of dose of reality that perhaps they're just looking for and need right now.
Yeah. So I think looking back, I've had a 20-year medical career and I have loved the vast majority of it. I absolutely loved med school. I absolutely loved my junior doctor days, being part of that team, running around with a cape thinking and a stethoscope around our necks thinking we were kind of saving the world on the wards. I absolutely loved it. And I loved a lot of general practice. And I think I'm quite achievement driven. So I'm always thinking, okay, what's next? Like I get a little bit sort of itchy feet if I sit around for too long on one, so I was a GP for, GP for 15 years, but I was partner for most of that. I was senior partner for 8 years. I was a trainer for 10 years. So I helped train other doctors. I was the clinical director of a sort of wider bunch of something called primary care networks. So those folk in the NHS who might be listening will understand that. They're kind of lots of practices all sort of come together to create a bigger organization that has a bit more spending power and economies of scale, etc. And I ran that for a while and also have a role helping to an appraiser for doctors, and then I have a role looking after the doctors who train other doctors. And so I've done lots and lots of stuff in the NHS, and I've loved the vast majority of it. But I think the weird thing about probably, it's not unique to the NHS, but I think almost is, even now if I go and do a morning's clinic, the work is exactly the same as it was 15 years ago when I started. I have a room, I see patients, they come and see me, bless their cotton little souls, and, they come and see me with their problems, and I try and whatever, and then off they go. And it's exactly the same now as it was 15 years ago. And there just isn't really that progression. I didn't really feel like I was growing. And I think something I'll often say when people ask, like you just have, in terms of that decision and that process. And I think for me, yes, it was a risk doing something different. Yes, it was a risk leaving the day job, the eat, work, sleep, repeat. It's the salary that drops every month, the comfort of the job, the colleagues, etc. It was a risk changing, but actually the bigger risk was staying within the same four walls, doing the same thing day after day after day, and the same eat, work, sleep, repeat. And I just, without getting too dramatic, I was just sort of quietly dying inside. I was burning out. It was wearisome. And the risk, actually, when I really think about it, the risk was staying, not leaving, which made it an easier decision.
I think that's a really interesting way to reframe that, looking and seeking that kind of next pursuit, that challenge in life. And again, I really resonate with that, and seeing it actually as more of a risk to stay put and do nothing. And interestingly, I think when we look around now, I think that I see more risk now than I ever did, and had I stayed in a role like the one I was in, or maybe taking another route in terms of professional career. Actually, I think recent events and perhaps the changes on the horizon with AI, I think we actually can see how fragile so much more of life, certainly including, employment and what we think is fixed employment, is. And that didn't really feature into my decision at the time, but I think it would do now if I was still there. And I, like I said, completely resonate with the idea of trying to challenge myself. I felt similar in my professional career. I know a lot of people that I've spoken to transition from their professional careers into property. I mean, one thing for sure, right, is that property is certainly not short of challenges.
100%. Yeah. No risks, funny enough.
And did you have to make a material change in your lifestyle for a period of time? I think that this is one of those things, there are different ways to do it. Some people save and then make the jump. Some people cut the cord and just go for it. How did you guys adjust to that change or plan for that change?
Yeah. So up until that point, I was doing 40-ish hours a week over 4 days. So I had a day a week when I wasn't in practice that I could put towards educating myself and heading down that property route. I suppose about 3 or 4 months in. So I ended up doing Simon Zucci's Property Mastermind I was like, right, if I'm going to do this, I need to know what I'm doing. I need to educate myself. And about 3 or 4 months into that, I realized that I needed more time. So I then dropped a day down to 3 days. So I went down to 3 days a week. Yeah, 30-ish hours over 3 days, and created a little bit of financial pain, but we could still live off that. And, but I was all in. I was as in as I could go while still having a mortgage and blah, blah, blah that I needed to manage. And, my wife, Laura, she's a school teacher, and she's been doing 3 days a week since we had the kids. So between us, we both worked 3 days a week, and then we had sort of a couple of days each to work it. So we were all in. We were still working, like I say, we were still working 40 hours a week initially, but it was very much right. This is now going to be our future. This is not something I'm going to dabble with on the side and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we were in, we remortgaged to release some equity.
Okay.
We were there.
And when you made that decision that you were going to make that big change, did you have a short or medium-term goal that you felt like you needed to hit to kind of almost get you back to an even keel from a lifestyle perspective? And if so, what sort of timeline did you give yourself for that?
Yeah. So I guess we were, to be honest, we were fortunate in the sense of I had a reasonably well-paid job as a GP. The money that we sacrificed when we dropped a day was a bit annoying, but certainly wasn't life-changing, if that makes sense. So, but yeah, the first goal, of course, was to replace that day's income that I had dropped. And I did that classic thing of going, we'll get that done in a year. And it took a bit longer, but that was the initial goal. It's like, right, small step. Right now, I'm going to drop a day. We'll have, maybe a year of a bit less income, but we can make that work perfectly fine. And then we'll replace that day, and then we'll just go from there. And then there's this balance where, then thinking, I'll continue to reduce my NHS commitments as the property income kind of rises the other way, if that makes sense.
So it sounds like you took quite a logical approach to balancing the risk with maybe some sacrifices in your lifestyle, and obviously you still do a little bit of professional work now. And I think that's also something I like to try and remind people that ask me this question themselves. Like, the worst case, if it doesn't quite work or pan out, or even pan out in the way that you want or as quickly as you want, you can always go back to doing what you're doing, or maybe a version of what you're doing, or even something slightly different. I think that safety net for most people, in all honesty, is there, right? I think it often seems a bit scarier than the reality actually is.
Yeah. So funnily enough, just this morning, I had my sort of yearly NHS appraisal, and we were chatting through exactly that. And I think there is that, that real sense of, I am so much happier right now than I was 2 or 3 years ago. Like, I'm in such a better place. Do I have more money than I was when I was working 4 or 5 days a week as a GP? No, not really, to be honest. Like, we're not there yet, but oh my gosh, we have enough. We have time, which is of course the biggest thing that just money can't buy, and my own well-being and mental health, and the time that we spend together, family time. We have August off every year, and we go and travel for 4 to 6 weeks. Life is different, and it is so much better. And again, we didn't know it would look like this when I decided to quit, essentially, when I decided to, reduce my hours and to end up leaving the partnership and the role. We didn't know that this was going to look like. We had an idea that we wanted it to look vaguely like this, but, here we are. And it's just life just keeps coming, and you make decisions, and you absolutely, I think for us as a family, I think, we're pretty good at getting stuff done. We're pretty good at following through on things. We don't give up. Like, these things that just, funny enough, you keep putting one foot in front of the other, you keep going in the right direction, you keep doing the right stuff, then the results have to come. That's just part of the equation, really.
I was having a conversation with somebody this morning, a good friend of mine, really, really successful individual, possibly owns more property than anybody I know. And in this conversation, he used the word persistence. And it's funny because I have just recorded a podcast on persistence. That podcast will have aired by the time, this one with you does. That kind of, I feel you have perhaps just described an element of persistence yourself, just putting one step in front of the other. Has the journey, to get where we are now, was it as straightforward as you expected? Was it as you anticipated? Or was it different? Was it more difficult? And what have you had to persist through, Michael, just to get where you are now?
So it certainly means slower than we were hoping. So everything just takes longer than we thought it would. Like, everything from buying a property to renovating it to tenanting it, whatever. Just everything seems to take longer than planned. And it is I think it is harder than we were expecting as well. So I think nothing's easy in life. Let's just be clear on that. And I think there is no easy, quick way to make money. Everything is rightly so. If it was easy and everyone would do it, etc., etc. So, it has been a challenge. And I think, we've had some setbacks on our journey. So our first ever deal, I'll tell you about this. Our first ever deal was a block of flats. We were super, super excited about it. It spent 7 months in conveyancing. We had architects draw up some plans. We put planning in. We were adding bedrooms. We were renovating it. We had, all of the numbers came back. Purchase costs, the build, the GDV at the back end was higher, 200 grand higher than we were expecting, that we were hoping that when we'd done our own sums, we're like, this is amazing. This deal is incredible. And 7 months in, the vendor changed their mind and took it off the market. And, we'd spent £15,000 by this point on plans, planning, legals, etc. Our first ever deal. And I remember sitting on the kitchen floor with my wife and a tub of ice cream and a medium to large whiskey, just going what are we doing? This is the right thing. I've reduced my time at the practice. I'm not loving it. Mentally, I'm leaving that place. This was part of the master plan. This property, this block of flats was part of the master plan to change our lives. And just like that, it's gone and we're back at square one. What are we doing? And I think it's in those moments when you've got a choice, isn't it? It's in those moments when it's is this the thing for us? Are we going to keep going? Are we going to people talk about trust the process and all this kind of stuff. And I guess when you're early on the journey, actually, you've not got all that experience. You've not got all that life property experience to know that these things happen. And we were just there going, is this it? What is a disaster? It's 15 grand, blah, blah, blah. So I think that was a good moment for us in our journey. That was a good moment of, a decision. It's this sliding doors moment. This is it. This is what we're going to do. we are going to pursue this. Yes, it's 15 grand. That's okay. We've got, a bunch of other cash. We've got other people's cash. We've got this. We know the system works. We know the numbers work. Let's go again. Let's go again. Let's go again. A bit of courage, a bit of remembering why we're doing this, a bit of a bigger picture. Am I going to go back to working in NHS 4 days a week? No, that's not what I want at all. So, you go again and you go again and you get up and you go again.
And you were still on the mastermind that you joined at this point, were you, Michael? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that an important part of, do you think, being able to continue and just finding almost support in, the difficult times and the difficult decisions? Because I remember many, many times, and I still have them now, where it does feel like an impossible challenge. Things that come from the left field and they're very difficult to deal with. And that is the reality on so many different scales and levels. But sometimes just being able to turn around to someone who totally gets it and understands it, which for many of us, we're not able to get from our friends and family and colleagues. Was that an important part of that resilience and that ability for you to be able to just keep persisting?
I 100%. I think so. 100%. And if you're listening to this now and you're thinking, I'm going to do it by myself, I'm going to listen to a few pods and get out there and do it, then on one hand, yep, go for it. Good luck to you. On the other hand, like, oh my gosh, just the benefit that comes with having someone to get alongside you and to chat these things out, someone with experience, someone that can, allay those fears and calm you down sometimes. And yeah, like you say, stuff goes wrong. Like it continues to. We've had planning refused on one of our projects recently. The bridge is running out. You're just like, I need you, but that just having someone that you can chat this stuff through, that, whether it's a coach professionally to help you, whether it's just someone that within your network, but it's huge. And I think, we hear Tiger Woods. So Tiger Woods had, I can't remember how many coaches, but it was 15 plus or something. And, best golfer in the world. And he's got 15 coaches around him to help him with every aspect of that. And I think, yeah, in life, property, having someone alongside you is so, so, so important. And we've continued to do that even after the mastermind year. I've continued to have a coach around me. Funny enough, I've actually not got one right now, but I'm just in the process of setting one up again, because it's been about 6 months. I'm like, no, I need someone alongside me. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, in a strange way, I love the fact that things do go wrong. That is, I find part of, and this sounds sadistic, doesn't it? But I find, part of the fulfillment is being faced with those challenges, and on a daily basis and on a weekly and a monthly basis, figuring it out, and just being able to sort of, have a beer at the end of the week, or whatever it might be, and say, well done, mate. That was a difficult one. And you've done all right there. And I do get a huge amount of satisfaction from being challenged in that sense as well. And going back to what you said earlier, I remember running my own clinics. It would often feel the same. It would often feel like it wasn't challenging. And I really do like that variety. And I think what I've learned over the years, and I'm sure you will continue to do as you gather more and more experience, but I have learned to deal with the challenges better as well. Not necessarily always better at finding the solution. Every challenge is a bit different, but just the way that I acknowledge it, the way that it sits with me, the fact that it doesn't necessarily keep me up at night, whilst it probably should do in reality. Yeah. And I've learned that there's so much more about this game that is learnable than I originally anticipated. So for anyone listening that is experiencing their own challenges, I think there is saving grace there, because I promise, whilst the challenges don't necessarily get easier to solve, I think they do get a little bit easier to kind of deal with on a personal and emotional level. So Michael, tell us where you are currently up to with the portfolio then. So how long has it taken to kind of get where we are now? And what does it currently look like?
Yep. So we did our first deal sort of November 22. And so we have 6 HMOs now. So in Portsmouth, we have, what have we got? 46 rooms, mix of young professionals and supported living. And right now, I guess we've got some slightly different strands to what we're up to, because we've got our own portfolio that's just sat there generating some income on the side. And then because we're finding deals, but we can't do them all, we then also portfolio build for others. So we have some clients that we're just supporting through their own HMO journey down on the South Coast as well. And we've got a rent to rent as well, because sometimes you start out, you just end up just kind of trying to do a bit of everything, not quite sure what would necessarily stick. But yeah, it's a mix of our own stuff and then doing stuff for others as well.
Location wise, you
Yep.
mentioned Portsmouth
Yes.
and a couple of different types of tenant demographic as well. So I'm
Yes.
interested to understand how you landed on Portsmouth. What was the process
Yep.
there? I'm sure you're a
Yep.
GP, you've gone through a very logical process. And also you've got professionals and you've also got some social kind of housing in there as well, or a version of that. And I know that that's something that
Yep.
you're really interested in, quite passionate and plan to do more of. So tell us a little bit more about those two elements and how that is starting to shape your business.
Yeah, of course. So we live in Hampshire. So we live just on the edge of the South Downs, sort of middle of nowhere, but sort of equidistant, I guess, between Portsmouth, Southampton, and Winchester. So when we started out, we knew that we wanted to invest locally. So I know not everybody does, and that's like, different decisions. That's totally fine. For us, we didn't want to be completely hands-on, and maybe explain a bit more about that in a minute. But we certainly, when we began, we definitely wanted to be local. We wanted to know that we could get to what we needed to get to, our own properties sooner rather than later. So we wanted to be more hands-on than perhaps investing up in the north, for example, which might take us hours to get to. So we were then looking at the areas around us. We knew we wanted a big city. We knew we wanted a population that we knew we wanted to do HMOs. We knew we needed a population where HMOs were in demand. And I think at the time we explored Portsmouth, Southampton, like I say, and Winchester quite a lot. Winchester is pretty pricey and, to be honest, doesn't necessarily work quite as well there perhaps as other places. Southampton and Portsmouth were pretty similar. Portsmouth just so happened really to have, I think, fewer rooms and more people looking. It is an island, so it is surrounded by sea on all three sides. There's not really any space for growth within Portsmouth in terms of properties, accommodation. It's the most densely populated city outside of London. It's got hospitals, universities, the docks, the navies there, lots of industry around. We just thought, you know what, actually, we would be happy to invest in both, but also we wanted to really, really kind of try and do that sort of inch wide and a mile deep. We wanted to really get to know and become known in an area. We wanted to be the go-to people if there were deals around. We wanted to really understand the market. So for us at the time, still working 3 days, 4 days a week, etc., we're just like, right, Portsmouth seems like for us a better bet. And then, I mean, we did a deal in Southampton that unfortunately fell over, but actually what we're finding is that 2 or 3 years in, actually, because we invest in Portsmouth, our network is there, people bring stuff to us, power team is all based there. It's kind of organically ended up being the place where the next deal and the next deal and the next deal just ended up getting done.
I just want to highlight that there because I think this bit is so important. We touched on this before we hit record today, didn't we? And we've all got our own objectives, haven't we, as investors? Some of us, we are looking for security. Some of us are looking to recycle cash, and that's our priority. Some of us, want that balance. And some of us don't want to be bothered by tenants at all. And some of us are happy, it's for something in the middle of all of that. But one thing, and you just said there yourself, that I've really tried to make sure that when people are trying to make this decision about location, that they do really understand is how much compounded value there is in just remaining focused on one location. The example you gave there was your power team is there. You said to me, and I love this actually, and no one, I think, other than I might believe you when you say this, because I do the same and I have done the same, but you dated builders for a year. You dated contractors for a year. I won't ask for the details on the dates, but to find the right one. And now that you've got a good build team behind you, that is obviously a critical part of your business, but so much time will have obviously been invested in that. And it's very difficult if you want to then go and operate in a different location. You need to do that again and find a different relationship that then needs managing. Is it right to say that reinvestment in that location and those relationships and all of that experience and knowledge on that local level, has that been quite a critical part of the success that you've been able to kind of achieve?
100%. Our success is because of the people around us, right? It's based on the guys around us. It's our power team who makes us look good and who's made us successful really in this so far, So 100% dated builders for a year. So I'm the host of Southampton Pin sort of networking meeting, and someone came up to me the other day and they're like, I've just bought this property. Can you recommend a builder? And, I'm civil and smile and like, yeah, of course I can. But inside, I'm like, how can you buy a property and like not yet have a builder? In my view, like how can you buy a property and not have a builder lined up? This is just like real basic stuff. And so for me, it's like, right, the builder is such a critical part of the team. How much is it going to cost? When is it going to get done? So again, you know, on our HMO projects, for every month that there is a delay, when you consider holding costs of the bridge and your bills, when you consider lost rent of, you know, over £6,000 a month, then you're looking at a £10,000 a month loss every month a project is delayed. And again, I had, you know, we know of someone the other day, chatted to them the other day, and they were doing a project not far from us, and they were 6 months behind schedule. And, you know, the builder was cheaper, but oh my gosh, like this is just, we've got to think outside the box a little bit. We've got to consider the cost, we've got to consider the stress, etc. So for me, as a, you know, spending a year dating builders, I was like, right, I need a builder. So price, funny enough, you know, price for me is not the main consideration. Yes, it's important, of course it is, but I want a project on time and on budget, and I want a team I can trust. And that's what I was looking for. And so, yeah, I took builders out for coffees, went out for lunch. I was, you know, your place or mine. I was like, can you show me, can I come to one of your projects and show me your buildsmanship, like what you've been doing, workmanship, like, you know. And some builders just never replied. Some builders, you can imagine, right? We know what, you know, love builders, love my power team, but, you know, sometimes folk are just too busy, they've got other priorities, and I totally get that. But after that year, we have a team around us now. We probably call each other, honestly, maybe 3 or 4 times a week about not necessarily even about any of the projects that we're on, just like, oh, Michael, have you heard about this property that's just coming on? Or I've heard about that. Or, you know, they're giving us deals because we just go straight back to them with the build. It's that relationship. We can trust them. They've never once been over budget. They've never once been late or delayed. And I know from my bridging terms, I know from my finance, etc., that the work's going to get done. Like, just got that confidence, and I can just phone them up and I can give them the address, and, you know, next project, let's go, and off they go.
I think it's also really important for our listeners to understand that you've got to earn that as well. You know, the truth is, if you are just getting started, you are at a disadvantage, because people like you and I have already established some of these relationships, and we have good operations and potentially able to move fast. It doesn't mean that there are no opportunities by any means whatsoever. It just means that it's a little bit more difficult. And it just means that you might have to try harder and persist for longer. And I think that that's one of the things that people trying to get into the market, that barrier to entry is high. It's getting higher because people like you and I and other investors understand just how valuable these things are, and we want to hold on to them. And there is a reducing pool of opportunities, you know, has been squeezed with all the tax changes and things like that. But persistence is the key. And I think there's also just an element of just self-belief that I think if you're just getting started or you're at the beginning of that journey, you just have to have the faith that if you do exactly as you have outlined and described today, it will work. It is just a matter of consistency and persistence and a bit of time.
Right. But these are like symbiotic relationships, aren't they? They're just like, you know, I think that's the right word. But, you know, the building firm, I'm not going into meeting builders thinking, how much can I get them down? You know, how much can I, you know, drive them down? No, that's not, I want a lower price. I need to be cheaper, you know, because I'm going to make more money. And it's like, well, maybe, but then your builder's probably not going to prioritize you. And then when you've done the project, you're going to go back with the next job, and they'll be like, oh, actually, I've got another one. Thanks, dude, over here. You know, so it was coming at it from the win-win. As a building firm, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for an investor that they can trust, someone that's going to keep bringing them deals, someone who's easy to work with, someone who doesn't change the plan halfway through, someone who, you know, has an interior designer and an architect that sets everything out from the very get-go with the spec completely done from the beginning, so that, and then it just, you know, just then runs through and they get it done, and we're not trying to change things halfway through and causing carnage. And, you know, that's what they want, and that works for us. And we want builders that we can trust, that we can just go back to the next job, etc. And so it is absolutely worth putting the time in. You're right that in some ways the bar is high, but that's okay. It just means you need probably a longer run up. Maybe that's the, you know, you just need to meet these guys, you need to get going, you need to, it's no point buying a property and then running around trying to find a builder. You know, all this stuff needs to be happening now. It's relationships being built, and so the team is there ready to go when you need them.
I think so. I agree. I think, you know, giving yourself a a bigger run up. I think also just having reasonable expectations of yourself and of other people.
Yeah.
It takes time to build trust. It takes time to build rapport. It takes time to construct really good deals. And certain people, a good power team or a good mentor or teacher, of course, there are ways to try and accelerate things. And money does often help if it's used in the right way. If you are prepared to pay a bit more, you might be able to get to the front of the queue or pick, the good deal off the shelf. But just having realistic expectations. And I think in a world where we're so used to having everything on demand, property kind of is a bit of a slap in the face, because it's like, whoa, hang on a minute. There's a lot of things here that, are going to do their very best to kind of slow you down. And that's just the nature of this game. And the second part of the question was about the social housing and that
tenants,
kind of slightly alternative strategy. You did a really fantastic case study about good tenant management, but can you tell us a little bit more about why you have started to diversify, Michael?
Yes, of course. So 100%, it's perfectly possible, and it's perfectly possible, of course, to have HMOs with good tenants that pay their rent on time and that look properties, etc., etc. They are absolutely out there. Not all our tenants, of course, have ended up being like that. Let's be honest. But most of our properties are rented out to young professionals and absolutely fine. We're doing great with it. We had one property that we bought in Portsmouth, which was basically, it was a little bit smaller, although still, it's a room slightly smaller than perhaps what we'd like to go for, but still perfectly fine. It was a really good price, and we just thought, right, slightly smaller rooms, slightly less rent, but no matter, let's crack on with it. It's a good deal. We can get all of our money out of that one, which was our first all money out deal. So let's do it. Again, what property is like, and it's a bit of a should we, shouldn't we, and you just end up having a bit of courage and going, no, we'll make it work. Let's get it done. And as we were building it out, as part of our network, was chatting to a friend also in property, and he said, well, I have a client who's looking for a provider who's looking for a 7-bed all-ensuite HMO. How about an intro? And we'd thought about that, kind of going down that route, but we didn't really know of anyone that did it. We didn't really know how to go about finding someone that did it. And so we'd kind of just defaulted to professionals. Anyway, long story short, we agreed with the provider a 5-year lease on this HMO. We agreed a price that, on the face of it, and this is really important as well, I think. So on the face of it, the rent is less than what we'd be getting from professionals. But of course, by the time we factored in all of our bills, by the time we factored in maintenance, voids, etc., it is higher than what we would be getting if we were renting it to young professionals. And obviously they manage the property, they pay all the bills. We have literally zero to do with this property, and it returns us over £2,000 per month. So it was a real eye-opener for us in terms of, not only is this great for us because actually this is management-free HMOs, but also, we're providing good quality housing for supported living tenants, which I think is still rare out there, if I'm honest. So we built out the property in the same way that we would have done had we rented it to young professionals. So again, that was a conscious decision. We're thinking, right, if this 5-year lease actually doesn't end up coming off, we don't want to be left with a property that has been spec'd lower for social housing, which is what some landlords will do. We wanted a property that would work for young professionals. We needed to pivot that way. And also it drove the GDV at the back end. So that worked nicely for us. And, and everyone's happy. So it's a model that we're repeating. We've got another property that we're just handing over to supported living. Got another one actually that's just in the pipeline as well. So it is, if I'm honest, it's making us more money for less hassle and less work, but it's also like we're in that supported living space. I grew up in social housing first 3 years of my life. It's pretty close to my heart, I think. And the more we do this, the more we want to be making a difference. We don't just want to, really honest, we don't just want to make cash. We don't just want to make money. Actually, if we can make money whilst doing some good, whilst putting some love out there, whilst changing people's lives as best we can with their accommodation, then that's amazing. And so we're just pushing more and more into that space.
Well, I think if you found a model that returns better, requires less resource and input, and it serves a greater sort of purpose, then that's the jackpot. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because whilst it wasn't necessarily what you set out to do in the first instance, it was being in the market and that activity that has taken you there. And I think sometimes it's certainly worth remembering that the great thing about property is it really is an open door, and there are so many different things behind that door. You just never quite know. One person, one relationship, one deal can completely change everything.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. And I think, we stepped into the property world from a place of, I can't keep doing the NHS. I need to be doing something different. That is my priority. Just a change of income and a change of scene. And now that we're getting our feet under a bit more settled, we're now actually making more kind of conscious decisions, right? How can we grow this? How can we do this well? How can we do this properly? How can we make a difference, et cetera, et cetera? And that is, like you say, so exciting. So many opportunities. It's amazing.
Well, it sounds like the future is very bright for you guys, Michael. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. I could chat about this stuff all day, and I love hearing these really genuine and honest and having these really authentic conversations with people like you. And I'm sure a lot of people who tuned in today to listen to this episode will feel inspired. I think there'll be many people who feel just reassured that it's okay, that maybe it's not going perfectly to plan, and that's kind of the fun of this. And I think you've shared some fantastic pieces of advice just around some of the methods to perhaps approach things like location and looking at your business and maybe strategizing your exit from work. So thank you for joining me today, Michael. It really has been a lot of fun. There's obviously stuff that you're doing now that other people can potentially get involved with, perhaps investors, perhaps people also that might be interested in a turnkey sort of service, which I think is what you're describing. Where would be the best place for anybody to come and find out a little bit more?
Yes, thanks, Andy. So come and find me on the socials. So Michael Taylor on Facebook or Dr. Michael Taylor on Insta. We're also on LinkedIn. Yeah, so we're building our own portfolio, but we are finding that there are more deals out there than we can do. So we use our own power team to help build out HMOs for others. So we can do turnkey, but we also do what we call like project support package. And that's really where the investor does the work, but we just get alongside and support and hold their hand and just make sure that the right things are getting done at the right time, etc. Again, using our power team, if it's down in the south, just to make sure that that sort of investment journey for people is as smooth as it can possibly be. So guys, come and find me, come and say hi. If you want to come and have a chat, we can do that. And come and see some of my projects. Really happy to show people around as well.
And there's the PIN Network event that you run as well.
Yeah, run the Southampton PIN networking meeting. So that's the first Tuesday of every month. Yeah, come and say hi there. If you use the code Dr. Michael, if you've not been to one before, DR Michael, then you can come for free on your first one. Again, it would be great to see you there.
There you go. You can go and sneak up on Michael and see whether he's legit. Michael, thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm really, really, really looking forward to seeing where this all goes for you.